The millionaire had spent every Christmas alone for years until the new cleaning lady said, "Come have dinner at my place." What happened next completely changed his life. Before we dive into this heartwarming romance story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end because we'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Jamie, I told you not to call me during work hours. Nora's voice was low but tense as she balanced her phone between her shoulder and ear, scrubbing at a marble counter that already looked clean. The echo of her brother's voice crackled through the speaker. Come on, sis. I just need a little. You always need a little. What you need is to stop gambling with the money you don't have. Her tone sharpened, but her hands kept working, moving faster, as if scrubbing away her irritation. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a cool male voice cut in. Miss Ellis. She froze, slowly turned. And there he was, tall, immaculate, and unsmiling. Ryan Maxwell. The man whose house she was cleaning. Her phone slipped off her shoulder. She caught it midair, hung up immediately, and straightened like she'd been caught committing a crime. I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell. I wasn't. On a personal call during work hours? His tone wasn't angry, just disapproving. Like disappointment dressed in a suit. Nora bit her lip. It was important. So is your job. He glanced around the spotless kitchen, his expression unreadable. Although, judging by the shine in here, I might forgive the multitasking. She couldn't tell if it was a joke. His face never changed. Thank you. I think, she said cautiously. He blinked once, then nodded. Carry on. And just like that, he turned and walked out. Nora exhaled. Great first day, Nora, she muttered to herself. I'll be lucky if I still have this job tomorrow. The Maxwell estate was a world of white walls, white floors, white silence. It wasn't just clean, it was cold. Even the air felt expensive. Nora had been a cleaner for 7 years, but she had never worked anywhere that felt so unlived in. She saw him again hours later. He was sitting at a glass table, laptop open, untouched cup of coffee beside him. She was vacuuming quietly in the corner when he suddenly spoke. Do you always talk to yourself? She jumped. Only when no one else will listen. That earned her a faint lift of his eyebrow. I see. Do people often refuse to listen to you? Only the ones who think they're too important to talk to a cleaning lady, she said before she could stop herself. His head tilted slightly. You're quite direct. I'm quite tired, she said with a shrug, then added quickly, sorry, that was rude. I'll stop talking now. He watched her for a moment longer, then closed his laptop. Don't. You're the first person who has spoken to me today. That made her pause. You're kidding. He shook his head once. Not counting emails and the occasional delivery. I don't entertain guests. Nora frowned. No friends? No family? None that matter. Something about the way he said it, calm, final, made her chest tighten. She didn't know why. Well, she said lightly, if you keep talking to your cleaning lady, you might end up with a friend by accident. He gave a tiny smile, or maybe she imagined it. I'll try to survive that risk. Hours passed. By late afternoon, snow began to fall outside, soft and steady against the enormous windows. Nora was in the living room polishing the glass railing when the lights flickered. Then it went out. Oh, she murmured. A second later, Ryan appeared, phone flashlight in hand. Backup generators delayed. I wasn't expecting this storm. Guess even rich people can't control the weather, she said, half joking. He didn't smile, but his tone softened. Would you like a flashlight? It'll take a while before power is restored. Thanks. But I'm done for the day anyway. I'll grab my things. She started toward the hall, but he hesitated. You might want to wait a few minutes. The driveway's all glass and ice right now. It's dangerous. Nora stopped. She looked back at him, standing there in his perfect shirt, haloed by the glow of his phone, completely unbothered by the cold silence surrounding him. Dangerous, she repeated with a small smile. I can handle dangerous situations. My brother's life is one long dangerous ride. His brow furrowed. Your brother? She shrugged. Yeah. He's complicated. He didn't ask for details, and she didn't give any. But they lingered there a while, in the half-dark, the kind of quiet that makes two strangers feel oddly less like strangers. A few minutes later, he surprised her. Do you like working here? The question came out flat, almost mechanical, but something about it sounded genuine. It's quiet, she said truthfully. Too quiet, maybe. But the pay is good, and the view's nice. He glanced out at the snow. I don't notice it anymore. How could you not? It's beautiful. He looked at her, expression unreadable. Beauty loses meaning when you have no one to share it with. That silenced her. For a second, even the storm seemed to pause outside. Nora took a breath. You know, she started, Christmas is next week. I'm aware. Got any plans? No. She blinked. None at all. I don't celebrate holidays. She tilted her head, studying him. Why not? I prefer silence. Her laugh broke the heavy air. You sound like one of those movie billionaires who live in glass castles and scare away happiness. He looked at her dryly. That's uncomfortably accurate. They stood there, watching the snow swirl beyond the glass walls. She didn't know what made her say it, maybe pity, maybe instinct. You shouldn't be alone on Christmas, she murmured. He didn't answer. So she said it before she could think twice. Come have dinner at my place. Ryan turned slowly, as if unsure he'd heard her correctly. I beg your pardon? You heard me, she said, cheeks warming. It's nothing fancy, just home food. My kitchen's tiny and half my plates don't match, but, she shrugged. You could use some company. He just stared. No expression. No words. Don't worry, she added quickly, embarrassed. It's not a date. Just dinner. I invite my neighbors sometimes too. I don't think that's appropriate. It's Christmas, she said simply. Appropriateness doesn't matter when someone's lonely. Silence again, long enough for her to regret every word. Then finally he spoke. I'll think about it. Later that night, when the power returned, Nora gathered her coat and bag. She hesitated at the door, glancing back once. Ryan was sitting exactly where she had left him, alone, the snow light painting his face pale silver. He looked up briefly, caught her gaze, and nodded. Good night, Miss Ellis. Good night, Mr. Maxwell. The elevator doors closed. Ryan sat back in the quiet, but it wasn't the same quiet anymore. Somewhere between her laughter and that absurd invitation, something had cracked open, something small, but impossible to ignore. He leaned back, eyes drifting to the window, where snow kept falling endlessly. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he wanted to be alone. Are you seriously asking me to pick out a Christmas tree for you? Ryan's assistant, Dave, sounded amused as he stood by the office door holding his tablet. Ryan didn't look up from his laptop. I'm asking you to schedule it, not to pick it out. That's still a Christmas tree, boss. You haven't had one in years. Should I be worried? No. Because last year you said, and I quote, decorations are a waste of time and energy. Ryan gave him a look. That was last year. Dave grinned. So what changed? Ryan's fingers paused over the keyboard for a moment before he continued typing. Nothing. But something had. He'd been trying not to think about it for a week, and failing miserably. Every night since that conversation, Nora's voice had replayed in his mind, clear and insistent. Come have dinner at my place. He had never been invited anywhere without an agenda. Clients invited him to manipulate. Investors invited him to gain. Journalists invited him to expose. But her invitation had no strings. No gain. Just warmth. He didn't understand it. And that made it harder to ignore. Nora was mopping the marble hallway when she heard the click of his shoes approaching. You're early today, she said without looking up. I wanted to check the inventory list myself, he replied. She smirked. You're checking if I've been stealing cleaning supplies? If you were, I'd probably never know. You're efficient. That was the closest thing to a compliment she'd ever heard from him. She looked up, and their eyes met briefly before he looked away. By the way, he said almost too casually, you mentioned something last week. About dinner. Her mop paused mid-stroke. You mean Christmas dinner? Yes. Still thinking about it? She teased. He ignored the tease. I don't usually attend social gatherings. Good thing mine isn't one. It's barely even a gathering. Just food and people who complain about the food. He hesitated. Who else will be there? My neighbor Mrs. Kingsley, her grandson, maybe my brother if he's sober enough to eat. She shrugged. That's about it. Ryan gave a small nod, as if that was information he needed to process in detail. All right. All right what? I'll come. Nora blinked, stunned. Wait, really? You're serious? I don't say things I don't mean. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She hadn't expected him to agree so easily. Well, that's great. 6 o'clock. Bring an appetite and maybe a sweater. My heater has trust issues. He didn't smile, but his voice softened. Understood. When she left that day, she couldn't help thinking about it. Ryan Maxwell, the man who lived in silence and spreadsheets, was coming to dinner at her small apartment. She didn't know whether to laugh or panic. At home, she threw herself into cleaning every inch of her already clean living room. Her brother, Jamie, watched from the couch, half amused, half bewildered. Who's the guest? The president? Worse, Nora muttered. My boss. Jamie raised an eyebrow. The billionaire guy? He's not a billionaire. Millionaire then. Same problem. You're inviting him here? Why? I didn't think he'd say yes. Jamie laughed. You're unbelievable. I know, she sighed. But he is lonely. So are a lot of people. Doesn't mean you bring them home. I just feel like he needs to remember what warmth feels like. Jamie tilted his head. You sound like a therapist. Maybe I am part-time. On Christmas Eve, snow blanketed the city like quiet poetry. Nora's apartment smelled of roast chicken and baked apples. The radio played old songs that made the air feel softer. She kept glancing at the clock. 5:55 p.m. No call, no text. 6:10 p.m. Still nothing. Guess he's not coming, Jamie said around a mouthful of mashed potatoes. Don't talk with your mouth full. He swallowed. Sorry. But seriously, Nora, guys like that don't show up at places like this. Maybe, she said, though her chest sank a little. She turned off the stove and started collecting plates when there was a knock at the door. Jamie grinned. No way. Nora froze, then wiped her hands and went to open it. Ryan Maxwell stood there in a dark wool coat, snow melting in his hair, a bottle of wine in hand. Good evening, he said calmly, though his eyes flickered with uncertainty. Nora's shock melted into a smile. You actually came. You invited me. Well, yeah, but people say things. I didn't think you'd take me literally. I tend to take words literally, he said, stepping inside. The warmth of her apartment hit him instantly, not just the temperature, but the scent, the faint laughter from the radio, the mismatched decorations hanging slightly crooked over the windows. This is different, he said. From your place? Everything is different from your place, she said with a grin. Take your coat off. You're letting the cold in. Jamie gave Ryan a cautious once-over when they were introduced. So you're the famous boss. I heard you don't smile. Ryan looked at him steadily. I heard you're supposed to be in rehab. Jamie blinked, caught off guard. Nora nearly dropped the spoon in her hand. Ryan added calmly, just stating what I was told. Jamie smirked. Touché. Dinner began with awkward silence. Ryan sat stiffly at the small wooden table, obviously unsure how to blend in. Nora kept the conversation light. She asked him about his favorite food, favorite movie, whether he'd ever been skiing. He answered politely, but briefly. Then Mrs. Kingsley from next door stopped by with her famous cranberry pie and immediately filled the silence. My word, you're a handsome one, she said, squinting up at Ryan. Are you single? Mrs. Kingsley, Nora said quickly, he's just here for dinner. Dinner leads to dessert, Mrs. Kingsley said with a wink before leaving. Jamie burst out laughing. Ryan looked bewildered. Nora wanted to sink into the floor. Sorry about her, Nora said. She's entertaining, he replied, surprising her with a small smile. They talked more after that. It started with jokes, then memories, then small stories that grew deeper as the night went on. Ryan asked about her family. Nora told him about her mother, who used to sing during storms, and about Jamie's trouble finding work. "And you?" she asked. "Any siblings?" He shook his head. "Just me. My parents died when I was 24. Christmas hasn't meant much since then." Her expression softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. "It was a long time ago." "Doesn't mean it stopped hurting," she said quietly. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the heater. Then Ryan spoke, his voice low. "This is the first Christmas dinner I've had in almost 10 years. Nora smiled gently. "Then I'm honored." When dinner ended, she offered him leftover pie to take home. He declined, but helped her wash the dishes anyway. It was almost funny, a millionaire drying plates with a towel that said, "Live, laugh, love." "You're good at this," she said. "I used to help my mother after dinner. She said it kept me humble." "Smart woman." Nora smiled. He glanced at her, and there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. She was. They stood side by side in comfortable silence, hands brushing once or twice at the sink. When everything was clean, he put on his coat and paused by the door. "Thank you," he said simply, "for inviting me. Thank you for coming." He hesitated, then added, "It was good." "Good." He allowed himself the smallest of smiles. "Better than expected," he added. Nora laughed. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is." She watched him walk down the snowy steps and get into his car. Before driving off, he looked back once through the window. Their eyes met for a brief second, and then he was gone. Nora closed the door slowly, her heart oddly full. Ryan didn't go home right away. He drove aimlessly through quiet streets, Christmas lights flickering on every corner. Laughter drifted from houses he passed, but he didn't feel like an outsider this time. He parked near the river and turned off the engine. The night was silent except for the faint rush of water below. He leaned back, staring at the snow falling against the windshield. For the first time in a very long time, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. And in that quiet peace, one thought stayed with him. He wanted to see her again. "Don't tell me you iron your dish towels." Nora leaned against the counter, hands on her hips, staring at the perfectly folded linens stacked neatly on the shelf. Ryan looked up from his tablet, mildly confused. "Is that unusual?" "It's very unusual." She grinned. "Next you'll tell me you alphabetize your spices." He hesitated, then admitted, "I do." She burst out laughing. "You're impossible." He closed the tablet, trying not to smile. "I believe it's called organization." "No, it's called obsessive." "And what do you call working past your shift just to tease your boss?" "Good company," she said lightly. For a brief second, his eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. Then she broke the gaze and grabbed a duster. "Anyway, I was just checking in before leaving. Thought you might have gone back to your natural habitat of silence." "I was reading," he said. "Figures." "What were you reading?" "An analysis report on international trade patterns." She groaned. "You really know how to have fun, don't you?" "Fun is subjective." "Not when you're reading reports on a Saturday night." Her laughter filled the room, soft and warm. It reminded him of her apartment, the way her presence had softened the air around him that night. He hadn't stopped thinking about it since. He had gone to her place expecting discomfort, maybe pity. Instead, he'd found peace. The smell of home-cooked food, the uneven laughter, even the tiny crack in her kitchen wall, everything had felt alive. Now, as she moved around his immaculate living room, humming quietly under her breath, he realized how much he'd missed that sound. "You seem happier," she said suddenly. He blinked. "Do I?" "Yeah. You used to look like someone waiting for a bad phone call." "I still might be." "Then maybe you're just hiding it better." Her eyes were gentle, not prying. He wasn't used to that. Most people wanted something from him: money, access, validation. Nora didn't. She just noticed him. "Do you ever stop analyzing people?" he asked. "Do you ever stop working?" she countered. He almost smiled. "Touché." Later that afternoon, the sky turned gray and heavy with snow. Nora was wiping down the glass staircase when she spoke again, her voice thoughtful. My mom used to say snow makes everything look new again. Ryan looked up from his desk. I suppose that's true. Do you believe that? That people can start over? He considered the question. Starting over implies something ended. Sometimes it has to, she said quietly, to make space for better things. He watched her reflection in the glass, the slow rhythm of her cleaning strokes. She wasn't just wiping away dust. She was carrying something heavy too. What ended for you, Nora? She paused but didn't turn around. My peace of mind, maybe. Because of your brother? Her hand stilled. He's had a rough few years. I keep hoping he'll change, but I don't know anymore. There was no self-pity in her voice, just tired love. Ryan said softly, You're still here for him. Someone has to be, she said. You deserve someone to be there for you too. Her hand tightened on the railing. When she looked back at him, her eyes were bright, but her smile was faint. Maybe one day, she said, when I meet someone who isn't afraid of a little mess. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck. Because for the first time, he realized he wanted to be that person. 2 days later, Nora was late. Not by much, just 15 minutes, but enough for Ryan to notice. When she arrived, her face was pale and tired. Everything all right? He asked. Yeah, just a long night. He didn't buy it. Jamie again? Her silence was answer enough. She began unpacking her supplies, but her movements were slower than usual. He walked over and said quietly, You can take the day off. I can't afford to. I'll pay you anyway. That's not the point. She turned to face him, frustration flashing in her eyes. I'm used to managing my life, Mr. Maxwell. You don't need to fix it. I wasn't trying to fix it. I was trying to help. Same thing. The words hit harder than she intended. The air between them shifted. He stepped back slightly, composed but distant. You're right. I overstepped. Her shoulders softened instantly. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful. You were honest, he said, voice even. I can respect that. They didn't speak much after that. The silence was heavier than usual, not the comfortable kind they'd shared before. When she left that evening, she hesitated at the door. See you Wednesday? Yes, he said quietly. Drive safe. That night, Ryan sat alone at his desk long after midnight, staring at a blank document. For years, his life had been perfectly controlled, predictable, emotionless. Now, one woman's voice could throw him completely off balance. He closed the laptop and walked to the window. Snow was falling again. In the reflection, he saw his own face, tired, but softer than he remembered. He thought about her words. You don't need to fix it. She was right. But how could he stand by when she was struggling? He didn't want to control her life. He just wanted to be part of it. The next morning, Nora woke to a knock on her door. She opened it to find a box on the floor, no name, just her address and a small note. Thought you might need these more than I do. R. Inside were groceries, a bottle of wine, and a warm gray coat that looked brand new. She sighed, half smiling, half exasperated. When she got to work that afternoon, she tried to sound firm. You didn't have to do that. I know. Then why? Because it's cold, he said simply. And you looked like you could use a break. She shook her head, fighting a smile. You're impossible. I've been told that before. They both laughed quietly. The tension between them eased. Later that day, she found him in the kitchen staring at the espresso machine like it was a math problem. You don't know how to use that thing, do you? I usually have someone do it for me. Well, consider today your first lesson. Step aside. She guided his hands as she showed him which buttons to press. Their fingers brushed briefly, and he didn't move away. See? Easy, she said. He looked at her, not the machine. Not for me. You're overcomplicating it. I'm aware. Their eyes met again, closer this time. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then she stepped back, pretending to busy herself with cups. You're getting better at talking to people, she said softly. Am I? Yes. You've stopped treating every conversation like a business meeting. That's progress, I suppose. It's more than that. You're letting people in. He studied her face, wondering when she'd become the center of every thought he had. That evening, as she packed her things, he surprised her again. Nora, I was wondering if you'd join me for dinner tomorrow. My chef prepared far too much. She smiled. Your chef? You mean the guy you never talk to? He's more of a silent artist. And what would we even talk about? Anything that isn't work. She hesitated. You sure this isn't weird? Probably, he admitted. But I'd still like it. She nodded slowly. All right then. I'll come. The next evening, the dining table looked almost human for once. No perfect settings, no intimidating silence. Just 2 plates, soft lighting, and the faint scent of rosemary. This is nice, Nora said, taking her seat. Almost feels like a real dinner. It is a real dinner, he replied. Maybe, but you don't seem like the type who eats with company often. You'd be surprised. I'd be shocked, she said. He smiled faintly. Then I hope this evening changes that. They talked while they ate, about books, about life, about what it meant to feel safe with someone. She told him about her mother's recipes, and he shared how his parents used to host charity dinners in winter. After they passed, he said, I stopped inviting anyone over. I thought if I kept the house quiet, I wouldn't miss them as much. Did it work? No. The honesty in his voice disarmed her. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his briefly. Maybe you don't need silence anymore. He looked down at her hand, then back up. Maybe I don't. For a long moment, neither moved. The warmth between them felt fragile but real. When the clock struck 9, she stood. I should go. I'll walk you out. At the door, she turned to face him. Thank you for dinner. Thank you for making it feel like one. Her smile lingered as she stepped into the snow. He watched her go, the warmth of her laughter still echoing in the hall long after she disappeared. And when the door finally closed, Ryan realized something had shifted again. For years, he'd lived in a world made of glass and numbers. But tonight it felt like home. You're smiling at your phone, Dave said, leaning on Ryan's office doorway the next morning. Ryan looked up, startled. I wasn't. You were. It's a rare sight. I almost took a picture. He set the phone down, clearing his throat. I was replying to an email. Sure you were. Tell me, which client uses emojis? Ryan gave him a flat look, but Dave's grin only widened. Who is she? No one. And I'm Santa. Ryan tried to focus on his spreadsheet, but his mind kept drifting to the text that had made him smile. A simple message from Nora. Thanks for dinner, even if your fancy plates made me nervous. He had replied, you made the evening better than any plate could. And she had sent a laughing emoji. Just one, but it had stayed in his mind far longer than it should have. Later that evening, he found himself lingering near the kitchen again. Nora was wiping down the counter, her hair tied up loosely, a few strands brushing her neck. You don't have to stay late, he said. I know. But I like finishing things properly. He nodded. That I understand. She smiled faintly and said, you've been smiling more lately. People keep pointing that out, Ryan responded. Because it's noticeable. He leaned on the counter across from her. You think that's a good thing? I think it's a human thing. She rinsed the cloth and wrung it out. You hide behind routines, Mr. Maxwell. Everything perfect, everything predictable. But I think part of you is tired of being lonely. Her words were quiet but sure, and for a moment he couldn't answer. Finally he said, you see too much. That's what people say before admitting I'm right. He wanted to argue, but instead he found himself asking, what about you? Are you happy? I'm learning to be. One day at a time. With your brother? He asked. Her expression dimmed. Jamie's trying, but it's hard. He thinks I'm disappointed in him. Are you? I'm disappointed for him, she said softly, because he's better than the choices he keeps making. Ryan nodded, understanding more than he expected to. You care too much. So do you, she said, glancing at him. You just hide it better. A quiet tension filled the space. The only sound was the soft hum of the dishwasher. He said finally, "Would you have dinner with me again?" She hesitated, caught off guard. "Like last time?" "Yes. Unless you prefer takeout and paper plates this time." She smiled. "Paper plates might save me from another lecture on silverware placement." "Then it's a deal." When she left that night, she found herself thinking about him long after she should have been asleep. The way he'd listened, really listened, not just nodded politely, had touched something in her she didn't expect. Maybe it was dangerous, she thought, getting close to a man like him. But her heart had already started down that path, quietly, stubbornly. The next evening she brought homemade food instead. "I figured we could switch roles tonight," she said. "You always eat perfect meals from perfect chefs. Try something made with real mess and real love." Ryan's mouth curved. "What is it?" "Chicken stew. My mom's recipe." "Then it's already better than anything I've had in years." He took a bite and closed his eyes for a moment. "This tastes like home. Exactly what it's supposed to taste like." They ate together at the smaller kitchen table instead of the formal dining room. It felt warmer there, less space for loneliness to hide. Halfway through the meal he said, "I forgot what it felt like to eat with someone who isn't talking about business or money." She looked up. "You sound like you miss ordinary things." "I think I do." "Then maybe you should start letting them in again." He studied her. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy. But it's worth it." Her smile was gentle, and in that moment, Ryan felt something shift quietly inside him, like he'd been living in grayscale and she'd just added color. A week passed. They grew more comfortable around each other, slipping into a rhythm neither expected. She teased him when he overanalyzed everything. He teased her when she tried to fix his already spotless counters. Then one evening, something changed. She had just finished her tasks when a heavy snow began to fall outside. "You should stay," he said suddenly. "It's not safe to drive in that." "I've seen worse," she said lightly. "Still, please. I'd feel better if you did." His tone wasn't commanding, it was concerned, almost pleading. She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, just tonight." He made tea, and they sat near the fire in his living room. The silence between them was soft, unhurried. "Do you ever miss anyone?" she asked after a while. "Every day," he admitted. "But I pretend I don't." "Your parents?" He nodded. "They died when I was 24. I threw myself into work and never came up for air. And now I wonder what I lost in the process." She looked at him with quiet understanding. "Maybe you didn't lose it. Maybe you just forgot where to find it." The firelight flickered across her face. Her eyes caught the glow, soft and steady. "You make it sound simple again," he murmured. "Maybe because life doesn't have to be complicated all the time." The air between them changed. He leaned slightly closer, and for a heartbeat, she didn't move away. But then she blinked and pulled back gently, her tone light again. "I should check on the guest room. In case I really can't leave tonight." He nodded, though a quiet ache lingered. "Of course." As she walked away, Ryan exhaled, realizing how close he'd come to crossing a line. He didn't just enjoy her company anymore. He needed it. And that, more than anything, scared him. Nora lay awake that night, listening to the wind outside. The guest room was comfortable, too comfortable. She thought about his eyes, the way his voice had softened when he spoke of loss. There was a part of her that wanted to reach out, to tell him he didn't have to be alone anymore. But another part whispered caution. He was her boss. Her world was small and real. His was vast and polished. Still, somewhere in between those two worlds, something was blooming, quiet, hesitant, but impossible to ignore. When morning came, she found him already in the kitchen, 2 mugs of coffee waiting. "You were up early," she said. "Old habits." He handed her a cup. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for making me want to." Their fingers brushed as she took the mug, and for once, neither of them looked away. The snow outside glowed white against the window. Inside, something fragile but beautiful was taking root, the kind of warmth that doesn't need words to be felt. Neither of them said it aloud, but both knew it. life for them was no longer the same. "You're humming again," Ryan said quietly, glancing up from his laptop. Nora froze mid-step, a broom in her hand. "Am I?" "Just same tune as yesterday." She smiled. "Guess it's stuck in my head." "It's peaceful." He didn't look away when he said it, and she caught the faint warmth in his voice. For weeks, she had noticed how much softer he'd become, not just toward her, but toward the world around him. He smiled more. He listened longer. Even the way he walked through his house had changed, like it finally belonged to someone alive. And she had changed too. She caught herself thinking about him when she cooked, wondering if he'd ever eaten certain dishes, or if he liked music when he worked. She even noticed she cleaned slower in his house than any other, not because of the pay, but because she didn't want to leave too soon. Still, some invisible line hovered between them. That line had held for weeks. Until tonight. It started with an unexpected knock. Ryan frowned when he opened the door and found Jamie, Nora's younger brother, standing there, disheveled, tense, eyes darting around the marble entryway like he didn't belong. "Jamie?" Nora said, rushing in from the kitchen. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," Jamie said. "You weren't answering your phone." "I was working," she replied, her voice already carrying that careful mix of worry and restraint. Jamie's gaze flicked to Ryan. "So this is where you work now? Looks like you're doing just fine while I'm freezing my—" "Jamie," she cut in. "Not here." Ryan stayed quiet, watching. He didn't want to interfere, but Nora's embarrassment was palpable. Jamie rubbed his jaw, clearly on edge. "Look, I just need some money. Just a little. I swear I'll pay it back." Nora shook her head. "You said that last time. This time's different." "You always say that." Ryan stepped closer. "Nora, is everything all right?" "It's fine," she said quickly. Then to Jamie, her voice low, "We'll talk outside." But before she could move, Jamie blurted, "You're cleaning for a millionaire and you can't even lend your brother a few bucks? What kind of sister are you?" The word stung. Ryan saw the flicker of pain in Nora's eyes before she turned sharply and led Jamie out the door. The silence that followed was cold and echoing. 15 minutes later, she came back inside, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she said quietly. "He's not always like that. You don't need to apologize. He's struggling. But he makes everything harder for himself." Ryan nodded slowly. "Do you need help?" "No. You've done enough. Please don't get involved." "I wasn't planning to interfere," he said softly. "I just don't like seeing you hurt." Her eyes lifted to his, uncertain but searching. "Why do you care so much?" He hesitated. "Because I see you trying so hard to keep everyone else from falling apart, and no one's doing that for you." Her lips parted, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to stop moving. "Ryan," she said softly, his name sounding strange and intimate on her tongue. "You don't have to." "I want to." His voice was low, certain. He didn't reach for her, didn't move closer, but the way he looked at her said everything. That night, Nora stayed later than usual again. They didn't talk much. She made tea, he worked quietly nearby. But the air between them was alive, fragile. When she finally put on her coat, she said, "Thank you for not judging him. He's your brother. You love him. That's all that matters." "Sometimes love hurts more than it helps." "Sometimes," he agreed. "But you haven't given up. That's rare." Her eyes lingered on him longer than they should have. "Good night, Mr. Maxwell." "Ryan," he corrected gently. She froze, hand on the doorknob. "Good night, Ryan." The next day, she didn't show up. Ryan tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting. Every time the doorbell rang or his phone buzzed, his chest tightened. By evening, he gave up and called her. No answer. He tried again an hour later. Still nothing. He almost convinced himself to let it go, until a knock sounded at his door near midnight. When he opened it, Nora was standing there, soaked from the rain, eyes red. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. "Of course." He led her inside, handed her a towel. "What happened?" "It's Jamie," she said, voice shaking. "He got arrested." He was with the wrong people again. She sat down heavily on the couch, covering her face. I told him to stop, I begged him. I thought he was getting better. But he's just lost. Ryan knelt in front of her, his voice steady. You're not responsible for his choices. I'm all he has, she whispered. If I give up, who's left? He hesitated for only a moment before taking her hands gently. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. She looked up, eyes full of tears. Why do you keep saying that? Because it's true. Something in her broke open then. A sob that came from deep inside, all the fear and exhaustion spilling out. And Ryan didn't hesitate. He pulled her close, holding her as she cried into his shoulder. He didn't say anything. Just held her, steady and warm, until the shaking stopped. When she finally pulled back, their faces were close, too close. Ryan, she whispered. He didn't answer. He just looked at her, at the strength and fragility in her face, and before he could think twice, he kissed her. It was slow, hesitant at first, like a question waiting for permission. When she didn't pull away, his hand came up to her cheek and the world around them dissolved. When they finally broke apart, she looked torn between fear and something deeper. I shouldn't have, he said quietly. Maybe not, she breathed. But I'm not sorry. They sat there in silence, the sound of the rain filling the space where words used to be. The next morning, the house felt different. She moved carefully, almost shyly, and he tried to act normal, offering coffee, pretending nothing had changed. But everything had. When she turned to leave, he said quietly, I don't regret it. She stopped, back still turned. Neither do I. But it complicates things. It doesn't have to, Ryan said. Maybe not for you. Her voice broke slightly, and he knew she was already building walls to protect herself. I have to figure things out, she said finally. About Jamie, about everything. I understand. She met his eyes, her voice trembling but firm. Thank you for being kind to me. I just need a little space to breathe. And before he could say another word, she was gone. That night, Ryan sat by the fire, staring into the flames. For the first time in years, his house felt empty again. But this time, the silence hurt in a new way, because it had once been filled with laughter, warmth, and a woman who had quietly changed everything. He didn't know if she would come back. But deep down, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't the man who spent Christmas alone anymore. Because now, he finally knew what he was missing. Snow fell softly outside the police station, turning the street into a blur of white and shadow. Nora sat on the cold bench, coat wrapped tightly around her, hands clasped together. She'd been there for hours, waiting for someone to tell her what would happen next. Jamie had been caught trying to sell stolen electronics. The man she'd begged to change had fallen again, harder this time. Miss Ellis. The officer called her name, holding a clipboard. Your brother's being transferred to the county tomorrow. Bail's been denied for now. She nodded numbly. Can I see him? Just for a few minutes. When she stepped into the small visiting room, Jamie looked up, eyes tired and bloodshot. I screwed up, he said quietly. Yes, she whispered. You did. He looked down, shame flooding his face. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You never do. He reached across the table. I'm sorry, Nora. I didn't want you to find out like this. I warned you. I told you this path would end here. Nora said firmly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said softly, You're still my brother. But I can't keep saving you. You have to want something better for yourself. Jamie nodded, tears in his eyes. I don't deserve you. Maybe not, she said gently. But I'll still pray you get another chance. She left the room before he could reply. Outside, the snow was still falling, and every flake felt heavier than the last. By the time she got home, it was past midnight. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ryan. Are you safe? She stared at the words for a long time before typing back. Yes. Long day. Do you need anything? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say, you. But instead, she wrote, I just need rest. All right, he replied. Call me if you change your mind. She smiled faintly. Even in silence, he cared. That was what made it harder. The quiet kind of love that didn't demand anything, just waited. The next few days blurred together. She took a break from work, claiming she needed time to help her family. Ryan didn't argue, didn't call again, but every morning, she woke up half expecting a message from him. At night, she'd stand by her small window, watching the city lights flicker, remembering his house, the warmth of his voice, the way he'd held her when her world was falling apart. Maybe she had run too soon. Maybe she was scared, not of him, but of the way he made her feel seen. Christmas Eve came quietly that year. The city glowed with lights, laughter spilling from shop doors and cafes. But for Ryan, the mansion was silent again. He sat by the fire, glass of wine untouched beside him, the same empty space across from him. He'd thought about calling her a dozen times. Then a dozen more. But he knew Nora wasn't someone to chase with money or comfort. She needed space to find her footing. Still, part of him ached for her presence, for her laughter bouncing off the marble walls, for her humming that had filled every quiet moment. He turned off the music and whispered to the empty room, "Merry Christmas, Nora." Across town, Nora sat on her couch, a single candle flickering beside her. She'd cooked a small meal, out of habit more than appetite. Her phone buzzed. A message from her landlord reminding her rent was due. Another from a friend wishing her Merry Christmas. She smiled faintly, but her eyes went to the third notification, a reminder she hadn't deleted. Christmas dinner with Ryan, 7 p.m. She exhaled slowly. Maybe he was alone again. Maybe he was sitting in that big, quiet house waiting for the silence to pass. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't deserve to be alone tonight. At exactly 7:30, the sound of a car door echoed through his driveway. Ryan looked up, startled, when the front bell rang. When he opened the door, the world seemed to still. Nora stood there, snow in her hair, cheeks flushed from the cold. She held a small basket in one hand. "Merry Christmas," she said softly. For a second he just stared at her. Then his voice came, low and trembling. "You came. I didn't want you to spend another Christmas alone." He stepped aside silently and she entered, her eyes sweeping the familiar room. Everything was just as she'd left it, except quieter. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," she admitted. "I've wanted to see you every day since you left," he said simply. Her chest tightened. "I just needed time. I didn't want to bring my mess into your life." He smiled faintly. "No, you're the part of my life that isn't a mess." She looked up at him then, tears threatening. "My brother's in jail. I'm barely keeping things together. You deserve someone whole." "I don't need perfect," he said softly. "I just need something real." The words broke something inside her. Before she could speak, he continued, "You made me remember what it feels like to live, Nora. You turned this house into a home again. Don't ever think that's something small." She shook her head, tears finally spilling. "You say that like I saved you." He stepped closer. "You did." And this time, when he kissed her, there was no hesitation, just warmth, truth, and everything they'd both been holding back. They ate dinner together, laughing between bites of her homemade stew. He had tried to set the table properly again, but she replaced the fancy plates with simple ones from her basket. "See," she teased. "You can't have love and luxury without a little chaos." He chuckled. "Then I'll take chaos every time." When the clock chimed 9, she leaned back, watching the snow outside. "Do you realize this is exactly how it started?" "What do you mean?" "Alone. Me asking you to come have dinner." He smiled. "Except this time, you came to me." She grinned. "Guess I did." Later, they sat near the fire again. The same spot where she'd once cried, where he'd once held her like she was the only real thing in the world. He reached for her hand. "What happens now?" She squeezed his fingers gently. "We start over. One day at a time. Like I told you before." He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "This time, I won't let fear win." "Good," she said softly. "Because I'm tired of running." The fire crackled between them, the glow washing over their faces. Outside, the snow kept falling, wrapping the world in quiet forgiveness. A few months later, when spring returned, The mansion didn't feel like a mansion anymore. The lights stayed on later. Music played from the kitchen. And sometimes, laughter echoed down the hall, hers, bright and alive. Nora still worked, still cared for her brother, still lived simply. But she wasn't alone anymore. And Ryan Maxwell, the man who had spent every Christmas in silence, had finally learned something money could never buy: the sound of a heartbeat beside his own. That Christmas, a year later, their home glowed with warmth, and she teased him again as she placed her mother's stew on the table. "I told you," she said, smiling. "Nothing beats homemade food." He smiled back, eyes full of the quiet kind of love that doesn't fade. "And nothing beats you inviting me to dinner." She leaned forward, laughter in her eyes. "Then you better get used to it. Because I plan on making that invitation every year." He took her hand, brought it to his lips, and whispered, "Then I'll never spend another Christmas alone." The snow fell gently outside, blanketing the world in peace, the same way love had blanketed their hearts. And this time, it wasn't a story of loneliness anymore. It was a story of two imperfect people who found home in each other.